And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations, oh what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on this Tuesday, July 7th, 2020, and I am just flabbergasted at how fast the time is going. Good to be with you. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style once again, and of course, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Please be sure, if you have not done so already, to subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also on Twitter, like the page at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. Go ahead and follow me. And of course, on Facebook, like that page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. In addition, JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com is the website to go, including Jimmy's Crossroads Club. The membership program there is a great opportunity to get involved to members.JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. And finally, be sure to follow, like, subscribe to our friends at the Washington Examiner on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and of course, at WashingtonExaminer.com. In just a little bit, we've got a lot we're going to do on the program in a short span of time here today. We're going to be joined by Professor Robert Hardaway of the University of Denver's Sturm School of Law, and he actually had an amicus brief he filed cited during oral arguments for a Supreme Court case that was just ruled on yesterday, dealing with the Electoral College and whether the so-called Hamilton electors can basically go rogue, be faithless electors, and say, you know what, I'm not going to vote the way that my state said I should vote. Instead, I'm going to vote my conscience. We'll talk with him more about that. But this Supreme Court case of Chiafalo v. Washington could have tremendous implications, including on the push for a national popular vote. That is to change fundamentally the structure of how we select a president of the United States via an interstate compact. To discuss this and break down what the National Popular Vote Compact is and what the Electoral College is, get a refresh there and more, I am pleased to be joined here today by Trent England, who's author of a fantastic book on this very topic. And Trent joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jimmy. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming on. So I want to ask you to really set the table for us. Remind us what the Electoral College is, and a big reason why we're talking about it today is because of this Supreme Court case yesterday. We're going to dive into it a little bit more deeply with our law professor guest in the next segment, but go ahead and kind of tee it up for us. Give us the overall synopsis of what was discussed.
Yeah, the Electoral College was created because the American founders first were going to create a parliamentary system. They were going to have Congress elect the president, and then they realized that's not really that great of an idea, right? You wind up with all the politics of Congress spilling over into the executive branch, potential corruption in selecting the president. So they created something kind of like a parliamentary system, but it's actually a two-step democratic process. And the way it worked out is that we all vote in our states, and we choose presidential electors, and then those presidential electors go on to vote for president. And so we have a two-step democratic process, and the Constitution just gives the states power to figure out how to represent themselves in that process, but all the states hold elections. So we have a two-step democratic process by which we elect the president of the United States.
Now, fundamentally, Trent England, the reason for this system, I mean, there's a lot of people who are saying now, oh, this is antiquated. We've had presidential elections stolen by Donald Trump and George W. Bush, although Bush was not the first time that we had a president who did not win the so-called popular vote, but did win in the Electoral College. A lot of people who say it's outdated and outmoded, and we should move beyond it and shift over to this national popular vote. Just underscore for us why the framers felt that it was necessary to set up a system of an Electoral College and have each state have electors based on the total number of representatives and senators combined, as opposed to saying, okay, we're just going to take a national total and use that.
Yeah, the Electoral College has actually become more important over time. The reason the American founders created it was that even back then, in 1787, you still had some very big states and very big cities relative to the rest of the country. And James Madison actually says at the Constitutional Convention, kind of getting close to the end, and they're trying to figure this out, he says, look, I like the idea of just doing a popular vote. Right? Just taking the raw national popular total and choosing a president that way, it's simple. But the problem is, and Madison put his finger right on this, he said the problem is we've got a few big population centers in this country, and they would control the White House, not in one or two elections, but in every single election. Everybody else would be left out. And, you know, the country has only gotten bigger, I mean, much bigger since then in terms of geography, in terms of population. We're much more diverse. The Electoral College forces our presidential candidates, our national political parties to actually operate nationwide to build big coalitions. You can't win with just a few cities. That's what Hillary Clinton learned, right? Her campaign was a disaster, really, right? She failed to reach out. She failed to win over states that Democrats had won for a generation. And because she basically became a regional candidate, with that region being the big cities, she lost. And the system worked exactly as it was designed to, and basically says to the Democrats, look, if you want to win the White House, you have to build a broader coalition. You've got to moderate. You've got to reach out to Americans who aren't already like you. And, you know, now what we see is some of those folks who lost the last election say, no, we don't want to reach out. We don't want to build a broader coalition. We just want to change the rules.
Once again, we're talking with Trent England, who's executive director of the Save Our States Project and author of Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. The antiquated system argument is very interesting to me because what it presumes is that something fundamentally has changed about population centers in the past versus population centers today. That is to say that when the Electoral College was set up, as we're talking about, it was to make sure that you have a diffusion of influence on selecting the president. So it's not just major cities that get to make that decision. The whole country has a role. That has not changed. Now, in fact, we've just had an expansion of population where now you have these population centers that can be even more expansive and more influential, leaving out other parts of the state. So if anything, the Electoral College is probably more needed now than it even was back in 1789.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the rationale of the founders applies today. And the system has actually worked much better than they ever suspected. They thought that oftentimes the Electoral College would deadlock and throw the election to the House of Representatives. That hasn't happened since the 1820s, right? The system actually works very smoothly, and typically the popular vote and the Electoral College results line up because the Electoral College it basically forces the candidates and the parties to operate in a certain way. And when they do that, they wind up, typically the winner of the Electoral College also gets the most popular votes, but they win it distributed around the whole country, which is a good thing for national unity. And I think it's just a tragedy that we see so many people out there who don't understand that. I mean, the New York Times, the Boston Globe are out there today saying, oh, this shows that the Electoral College, we don't need it anymore. As you say, it's an anachronism. It's so far from the truth. If people would just look beneath the surface and understand why these constitutional structures exist and how they really kind of build our national politics. And look, I mean, it's the same reason why in so many other countries around the world, they don't have a direct popular vote for their president or prime minister. They're either a parliamentary system like Canada and Australia and Great Britain, or they have a kind of an electoral college like they do in Germany and in the largest democracy out there, India, right? All these countries, they want some kind of check and balance system that makes sure that regional candidates don't win the top spot. And, our system works great at that.
It is so fundamental to keep that in mind, but also one thing that always I think about, if we had a national popular vote, I'd love for you to describe what the proposal is for this national popular vote compact that has been gaining steam across the country. I know in 2019, my home state of Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, signed on to this compact from the state legislature, although now on the November 2020 ballot, there will be an initiative to repeal that measure. But nevertheless, there's this movement to shift over to a national popular vote via having this compact. And one thing I keep in mind, other than what we've been talking about, is the complexities and the idea of having a national election. I mean, right now, think about 2000. When you had hanging chads as an issue in Florida, you didn't have a big national stop in counting ballots and everything, and a major lawsuit that was encompassing a whole bunch of different states. It was Florida and the campaigns. It was a major lawsuit because it got to the United States Supreme Court, but it was dealing with Florida issues and Florida's electoral delegate count. Imagine it being on a macro scale where all of that gets brought up in a much larger context, because you have 50 states that are now suddenly embroiled in a conflict over Electoral College delegates, as opposed to just Florida or just Michigan or some state that's caught in the crossfire.
That's right. And this whole scheme, which came out of the Al Gore loss in 2000, basically a group of people in California came up with this plan to try to get states to pass laws that say, we'll ignore how our own voters vote, and instead we'll give away our votes in the Electoral College based on the national popular vote, right? And this is a way to basically hijack the Electoral College and turn it into a direct election, turn it into exactly what the American founders rejected, and kind of nullify the whole thing without ever changing the Constitution. The problem with, there are all kinds of problems with that, because we don't really have a national popular vote. Every state runs its own elections. And when you start cobbling together all of these state elections and claiming that you can build a national popular vote out of that, we forget it's not just that we don't have nationwide recounts, that if there's some dispute somewhere, it's controlled. If you have election fraud, right now, in Chicago, all they can steal is Illinois, right? And, if the Democrats are concerned about, how they run elections in Texas, well, all they can do in Texas is affect the outcome in Texas. But if you go to a national popular vote system, Chicago can steal the whole country, or Texas, or whatever state or city a person doesn't like, right? The National Popular Vote Compact says nothing about this. It has no provisions for how you would deal with recounts, how you would deal with election disputes, fraud. They're silent about all of that because they want to pretend like none of those problems exist. It would walk us into, just as a practical issue, all kinds of litigation, all kinds of election disputes, the potential to not even know who the legitimate president is until after Inauguration Day. And, it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's great that Coloradans this November can vote to get the state out of it, because it's so dangerous. And, it rejects the wisdom of our Constitution, which is what we've used for over 200 years.
Absolutely. Again, Trent England, our guest, Executive Director of Save Our States, and author of Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. And yesterday, as I'm going to get to in the next segment in greater depth with our next guest, Professor Robert Hardaway, in the Supreme Court case of Chiafalo v. Washington and also related case of Colorado Department of State v. Baca, the court said you can't have faithless electors, that is, electors who go against state law, which says, hey, you must vote based on the popular vote in our state. So Colorado and Washington had electors that said, nope, we're going to vote differently from what the state's people said. Some are saying, well, okay, this maybe makes it more difficult for the national popular vote argument to go through, or maybe it makes it more easy to do it, depending on your perspective. There's a debate about that. How do you think this case could impact the debate over the national popular vote and what might happen moving forward if, say, there were enough states that signed on to this compact to suddenly get it to kick into gear, where those states have their electors chosen based on the national so-called popular vote instead of their individual state's popular vote?
So legally, the case is very different than any case that we would bring to challenge national popular vote, because states have two kinds of laws on presidential electors. One kind of law is about how those electors are selected. The other kind of law is about whether those electors are bound to vote a certain way. And the court case was about whether the electors can be bound. The National Popular Vote Compact changes how electors are selected. So the issues are a little bit different, but Justice Elena Kagan, in her opinion yesterday, did multiple times remind us that the whole tradition of the Electoral College, the way it's been understood since almost the very beginning, is that presidential electors go with their state. That states choose presidential electors to represent the people of their state. And it was great to see Justice Kagan over and over again using that language and reminding people the purpose of the Electoral College, right? Whatever nuances there are, whatever little differences there are between the states, the purpose is to have presidential electors representing their state, which really means the people of their state. It raises some real questions about whether the Supreme Court might strike down the National Popular Vote Compact, should it ever take effect, based on that same rationale, that same understanding of American history.
I believe it was Justice Thomas who also made the point in his concurrence that states cannot just enter into interstate compacts without congressional authorization, and that's exactly what this is, a national vote compact.
That's right. That's right. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has never enforced that provision of the Constitution. But I think this this is exactly the kind of interstate compact that, if it's not struck down for other reasons, should at least require the consent of Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one final thing I want to do real quickly before we let you go, Trent England. I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we will have more conversations in the future on this program, but I want to put up pick 3. This is an image, a cartoon a few years ago that was put out by a gentleman on behalf of the Daily Signal, which is Michael Ramirez. And what it does is it shows what the country would look like in an electoral college map if electors were selected based on the national popular vote. And you can see how influential California and Texas and Florida and New York would be versus all of the other states, with just a few that are smatterings of slightly larger influence. But really, you have this massive concentration of voting influence on selecting the president of the United States on these big population centers, leaving whole swaths in the country, flyover country, out in the cold.
No, that's exactly right. If Colorado joins this National Popular Vote Compact, if the voters don't vote it down in November, and the compact ever took effect, Los Angeles County would have twice as much power over Colorado's presidential electors than voters in Colorado would have, right? All of a sudden, California, New York, Florida, Texas, they would have huge power over Colorado's voice in presidential politics, right? I mean, I don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea.
I don't either, unless they want to have influence in those particular population centers for their own political reasons, that's for sure. Trent England, again, check out his book, Why We Must Defend the Electoral College, and also Save Our States. What's the website so people can learn more about the importance of this institution?
Yeah, saveourstates.com is the website, or people can find Save Our States on Facebook.
Trent England, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, sir. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jimmy. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Trent England joining us. Check out the book, Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. In just a few moments, we will be joined by Professor Robert Hardaway of the University of Denver Sturm School of Law, who put forward an amicus brief in this whole case on the electors and their ability, the question of their ability to be independent. Keep it right here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Certainly we want to be safe. We want our fellow citizens to be safe, but there is never a time to short-skirt the Bill of Rights.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know! Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body, so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler.
Thanks for coming to this medical convention with me, Captain. You're a true friend.
You promised there'd be green women.
Well, I'd like you to meet some of my colleagues. This is Dr. Scholes, podiatrist.
How do you do?
And this is Dr. Pepper.
Gesundheit.
Oh, and here comes Dr. Phil. He's a psychiatrist.
Well, every pancake has two sides. And
You're right, Doc. He is boring.
I'm right here.
And this is Dr. Spock, child psychologist.
Goodgy.
And of course, this is Dr. Octopus.
Oh, hello. How do you do?
How do you do?
How do you do? Hi, give me five. Pleased to meet you. Give me five. How do you do?
You do.
So, Doc Ock, what's your field?
I am a proctologist.
Oh, I wish I hadn't shaken all 8 hands.
Well, did the captain bring enough hand sanitizer? Tune in next time when we hear...
And this is Dr. Quinn, medicine woman.
Finally, a woman.
Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya?
Ugh.
On Starship Winkler.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages, while Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, friends, to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as always. And as a reminder, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Jimmy at the Crossroads, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. And then also you can follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And on Facebook, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro will get you to the page for Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality. And finally, please do log on to jimmyatthecrossroads.com, where you can go to the membership program, the shop, and more. Great opportunities there for some fun things here on the program to get yourself involved. And, of course, follow our friends and partners at the Washington Examiner, washingtonexaminer.com, on YouTube and Facebook, as well as Twitter. So great to be with you today. Yesterday, we had quite a Supreme Court case that went on. And it is always fascinating when you get a 9-0 court decision. Now, there were actually two cases before the court dealing with the Electoral College and this notion of faithless electors. The case that is most noteworthy, I suppose, is Chiafalo v. Washington. And there's a related case of Colorado Department of State v. Baca. And the important thing to note about these cases is that they were separated, but their decisions are basically the same, as I understand it, where the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot have a faithless elector. If you, as an individual, decide to vote against the law of your state for some other candidate that did not win the popular vote of your state, like Washington and Colorado, then you can be penalized by the state for doing so, as it happened in both of these instances. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled in favor of the idea that these states do have such authority. And I wanted to talk about it, dive into this landmark decision with Professor of Law at the Sturm College of Law at the University of Denver. Professor Robert Hardaway is joining us now. He was actually involved in putting forward what's called an amicus brief, or a friend of the court brief, in these cases, and that had actually been cited during oral arguments. Professor Hardaway, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hello. Would you like a little brief background
Yes,
about
please.
the Baca case that was decided yesterday?
Yes, well, welcome to the program. And please do go ahead and set up for us, if you could, in the background, both Chiafalo v. Washington and Colorado Department of State v. Baca, because they both go together, in a sense.
Yes, just a brief background. Approximately 32 states, including Colorado, have laws regulating their electors, and indicating that the electors are required to reflect the will of the people in that state. Now, the Constitution, under Article 2, does not say anything about whether electors have free will or whether they. The only thing the Article 2 says is that the legislatures of each state can determine and regulate electors. And it was this basic constitutional provision that the Supreme Court relied upon in saying that states have the power under Article 2 to determine how electors are to be regulated. And that's why they upheld Colorado's law, which regulated electors and provided the requirements for the office of elector. The main requirement is that they vote for, in the Electoral College, the person whom they promised under oath to vote for. And that was the basic principle that the Supreme Court relied upon in their 9-0 opinion, saying that states had the power to provide such laws. Now, other states do not have such laws, and in those states, electors would still be free to vote for anyone they want to. But in the the 32 states that, like Colorado, have a law requiring electors to vote for the person to whom they're pledged to vote for, those laws have now been upheld. And this is, I think, a very good result, because we saw in the last election that there was a great deal of threats and intimidation against electors, trying to get them to violate their pledges. And that would mean that we really have two-stage election, one in November and then a second one in December, where all bets are off. And if people are threatened or their fines are offered to be paid, an election could be changed simply on the whim of an individual elector. And back in the year 2000, the election was won by exactly 2 electoral votes. All you'd have to do is change the votes of 2 electors by offering to pay their fines, as was done in the 2016 election, and you could change the entire outcome. So I think this is a very positive result, and that's why I think it was 9-0 in favor of the ruling of the court.
Professor Robert Hardaway, again, of the School of Law at the University of Denver. Good to have you once again on the program. I want to ask you, please, about the notion of the national popular vote. We were talking about this in the previous segment. Please speak to this issue of a stalking horse of sorts that has been claimed, that this is a stalking horse for the National Popular Vote Compact to try and bring that about.
Yes, well, the NPVIC people don't make any bones about it. They say, we really just want to abolish the Electoral College. They have some threshold problems, though. The whole idea of the NPVIC is that some states would form a kind of a cabal, and they would agree to ignore the will of the people in their state and instead cast their electoral votes. The state of Colorado, for example, would cast their votes in accordance with the popular vote in the rest of the states. The problem with that is there is no popular vote. It's based on an illusion that when voters go into the voting booth, they are voting for a presidential candidate. Of course, they are not voting for a presidential candidate. They're voting for an elector. And if that elector then goes on and votes for someone other than the person they're pledged to, how would you count the popular votes, for example, for Hillary, if the voters in Colorado voted for a slate of Democratic electors who had pledged to vote for Hillary, but then they vote for the Republican instead, which is exactly what happened in 2016. There's no way to count popular votes because there are no popular votes for candidates. There are only popular votes for electors. This is the way it works in Great Britain and all the great parliamentary democracies. You vote for in England, they don't call it an electoral college, they call it a parliament. You vote for a member of parliament, and then that member of parliament then goes to the parliament and casts the vote for the leader. But this scheme, this is about the 700th scheme in the last 200 years that has been proposed. But every time this scheme similar schemes have been proposed, they always get shot down by what John F. Kennedy said when he resisted attempts to mess with the Electoral College back in 1956. And what he said at that time was, and he convinced the people not to mess with it. He convinced his fellow senators. He said popular vote election would greatly increase the likelihood of a minority president, that is, a president who received a minority of votes. It would break down the federal system under which the states enter the union, which provides a system of checks and balances that ensure that no area or group shall obtain too much power. Now, the reason the drafters of the Constitution provided for a separate electoral college was because they wanted to adopt certain elements of the British parliamentary system, which is that you vote for members of parliament, we call them electors, and that they vote for the leader. But they didn't want the same body, the Congress, to be the same body, the elected president, because they wanted a check and balance. They didn't want a president to be beholden to the legislature. And that's why they provided for a separate electoral college. It's really sort of a different branch of Congress, right, but it only has one duty, the duty to elect a president.
Now, how do you think this decision of the Supreme Court in both the cases of Colorado Department of State v. Baca and Chiafalo v. Washington could impact the national popular vote? Could they?
I think it could. I mean, for one thing, it highlights that there is no such thing as a popular vote. For example, how would Colorado decide how to count popular votes for Hillary when the Hillary elector decided to vote for the Republican? Do they count that as popular votes for Hillary, or do they count that as popular votes for Trump or another Republican? There's just no way to calculate it, and the media fosters this illusion. At the bottom of the screen, when you look on election night, it says the popular votes for Trump or Hillary are as follows. Those are not popular votes at all. And in some states, for example, in Alabama, they have been known to present voters with a slate of unpledged electors who have not pledged to vote for any candidate. Now, if the Alabama voters vote for, say, the Democratic slate of unpledged electors, how do you calculate the number of popular votes to be allocated to a particular presidential candidate? Simply can't be done. And when you present this issue to the MPVIC supporters, they say, well, I don't know how that would be resolved. I guess you just have to disenfranchise all the people who voted for electors that didn't vote for the person that they're pledged to. So disenfranchisement is of hundreds of thousands of voters. And the Baca attempted to basically disenfranchise 138,000 Colorado voters by saying, even though I told my voters that I promised to vote for Hillary, I'm going to vote for a Republican instead. Now, how do you count popular votes in that situation? You can't.
Sure.
So it's a non-starter from the beginning. Of course, there's all kinds of constitutional issues involved with that, but that's just a threshold issue. The MPVI says we'll count as popular votes that are associated with the vote of an elector. But do you count the popular votes for an elector who had pledged to vote for Hillary? Do you count that as popular votes for Hillary, or do you count it as popular votes for the Republican? There's no way to do it. And the newspapers are the ones that count up these popular votes. And delegating to the newspapers, such as Fox News or whatever, the duty of trying to figure that one out is really beyond the pale.
Again,
and
Professor
every time,
Robert Hardaway, our guest from the University of Denver. Sorry to jump in here, but I do want to go back to some of the specifics of the Supreme Court decision in Chiafalo v. Washington and Colorado Department of State v. Baca, Professor, because there's a lot of discussion that has been going on about the idea of Hamilton electors and what this decision is in terms of the impact, not just on national popular vote, but in general, the idea that states can penalize those who are electors, made the pledge, and then violated that pledge to vote the way that they were supposed to. So I want to pick one here. You can't see this, but I want to read a little bit of Justice Kagan in her decision and then get your reaction. Justice Kagan, writing in Chiafalo, said this, quote, "The elector's constitutional claim has neither text nor history on its side. Article 2 and the 12th Amendment give states broad power over electors and give electors themselves no rights. Early in our history, states decided to tie electors to the presidential choices of others, whether legislatures or citizens. Except that legislatures no longer play a role, that practice has continued for more than 200 years. Among the devices states have long used to achieve their objective are pledge laws designed to impress on electors their role as agents of others. A state follows in the same tradition if, like Washington, it chooses to sanction an elector for breaching his promise. Then, too, the state instructs its electors that they have no ground for reversing the vote of millions of its citizens. That direction accords with the Constitution as well as with the trust of a nation that here we, the people, rule. Professor Hardaway, what did you make of the Supreme Court's opinion 9-0?
Yes. Well, the reason it was a 9-0 opinion was because because the Supreme Court said it was preposterous to say that states don't have the power under Article 2. and the 10th Amendment, according to Thomas, either one of those, don't have the power to regulate how electors are going to be qualified to vote. And I think they were offended by the whole notion that a voter in Colorado could, in good faith, vote for a Hillary elector, and then find out that the Hillary elector is not going to vote for Hillary in the Electoral College. And that effectively, since Colorado has 9 electoral votes, and since this one person, his Hillary elector, decided to violate his oath, that would in effect have disenfranchised 138,000 people who went into the voting booth thinking, oh, I'm voting for Hillary. No, they're not. They're voting for a guy named Mr. Baca who said, I'm not going to vote for Hillary. So that was the problem that the Supreme Court addressed and said that kind of outrage could never be permitted to continue.
Yeah, in essence, what we are voting for at the ballot box is for electors who will vote for our chosen presidential candidate, whoever ends up winning the popular vote in the state. That is to say, the most number of votes in the state of Colorado or the state of Washington or wherever else the electors who are selected to then go to the Electoral College are those who are pledged to that particular individual. Now, what I also would like you to clarify, Professor Hardaway, is why we have 2 cases here. We've got Chiafalo v. Washington and Colorado Department of State v. Baca. Both of them have the same sort of conclusion, but technically they're 2 separate cases. Can you explain that?
Yes, we just have to be careful when we use the term popular vote, because the popular vote you're referring to is not a popular vote for a presidential candidate.
Right.
It's a popular vote in Colorado for a slate of electors
pledged to
who have promised that if you vote for them, they will vote for the candidate.
Right.
So just as long as we're careful when we use the word popular vote, we're not talking about popular votes for candidates. We're talking about popular votes for electors. And when many people have forgotten what they learned in 6th grade civics class. They think that when they go into the voting booth, they're voting for Hillary or they're voting for Trump. No, they are not voting for them. They're voting for a fellow named, among 9 electors, they're voting for a guy named Baca who says, if you will elect me, I will promise to vote for Hillary. And then when they violate their pledge, they basically disenfranchised all the people who went into the voting booth thinking that they were voting for Hillary Clinton, and they were not.
But why are there 2 cases? Why Chiafalo v. Washington and Colorado Department of State v. Baca? How did that work?
Well, yes. In Washington, they had a law that said that electors are required to vote for the person they're pledged to vote for. But they didn't provide for replacing the elector if they violated their pledge. They just said you get a $1,000 fine. And that's why in the 2016 election, a lot of people were trying to harass electors, saying, well, we'll pay your fine for you. Go ahead and change your vote. Change the whole election. We'll pay your fine. But the question in the Washington case was, can the state of Washington, do they have the power to fine somebody to enforce their law that says that electors have to vote for the person that they're pledged to vote for? But in Colorado, it was different. They didn't mess with fines or prison terms. They just said, you haven't qualified as an elector, because one of the requirements that we've established for an elector is to vote for the person that you promised to vote for. So they said, now that you have not qualified, we get to replace you. Just like on a jury, if a 15-year-old gets on a jury and is not qualified to be a juror, that juror is replaced. That's exactly what the state of Colorado did, according to state law, which says if you don't meet the requirements, you will be replaced. And so that's what the Colorado did. They replaced the elector who had not qualified, and they simply replaced it. But the Supreme Court said that either one of those enforcement provisions is constitutional. And I understand also that now Washington realizes a $1,000 fine is not a very effective enforcement mechanism. So I understand that they are now changing to the Colorado version of the statute, which is that we're not going to send you to jail, we're not going to fine you, but we're going to replace you. So that's the difference in the 2 cases.
And finally, Professor Hardaway, can you tell us about your amicus brief? I know that was referenced during oral arguments and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I filed an amicus brief. I'm a friend. It means friend of the court, because I was very concerned because there was a 2-to-1 decision in the the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals that said that the states were powerless to require electors to reflect the will of the people in their respective states. And I've been studying this, the Electoral College, for over 40 years, as a matter of fact. I first got interested when I was at the age of 16. And I was in a government class, and we used to debate this whole question of the Electoral College. And the person who opposed me at that time was a fellow named Al Gore. He was my classmate at the time. And so ever since that time, I have been most interested. I've written a number of books, because a lot of people don't understand the history of the Electoral College. They don't understand that it was the compromise that created the United States of America. We wouldn't have the United States of America because at the Constitutional Convention, the big state brutes said we should just have a Congress that is based on population. The small states said no. Every state should have a say, and we should have equal suffrage. And so at the last minute, it was Benjamin Franklin who probably was the one who proposed a compromise. Well, let's do both. That's how we will create a federal republic. So the country can't be ruled by little enclaves and on the coast, for example, with ignoring the interests of the hinterland. It must be broad support across the entire country, and that has served us very well. Also, most of this is political theater, because most people have also forgotten what they learned in 6th grade civics was about the last sentence of Article 5 of the Constitution, which says you can't take away equal suffrage in the Senate. That is, every state gets equal number of senators in the Senate. You can't do it unless every state agree. It's the only provision in the entire Constitution which cannot be amended by constitutional amendment. It requires unanimous consent of the states. And of course, every state's weight in the Electoral College is based on that equal suffrage in the Senate, which cannot be abolished unless every state agrees. And that will never happen. That's why I call most of this discussion totally political theater, because it simply will not happen.
That's so fascinating. And the most intriguing tidbit that you said, I have to say, is that for like his whole life, Al Gore has had issues with the Electoral College.
Well, yes. It's interesting, too. Another tidbit is that back in 1960, it was the Republicans who thought that the Electoral College favored Democrats, and they had a good point, because in fact, in the 1960 election, according to the New York Times and according to the Congressional Quarterly, Kennedy won the electoral vote, but did not win the popular vote. And so the Republicans were convinced that the Electoral College was some kind of anachronistic institution that was prejudiced against Republicans. But demographics change. And some people now claim that the Electoral College favors Republicans. It changes according to the demographics. When I went in 2003, when they first tried to put through this NPVIC scheme, I went down there and I said to the Senate committee, I said, if you'll give me 10 minutes, I can explain to you why this is totally ineffective. It can never be implemented. And they were had a preliminary vote of 10-1 in favor of the NPVIC. After they listened to me for 10 minutes, they changed their vote to 10-1 against it. They said, of course it can't work. You can't even have a recount. How can you have a recount when some states would recount and others wouldn't, according to their state laws? You can't have a recount when only some states. So they basically said it was ridiculous. But then last year they tried again, like a bad penny. They came back through the back door. But this time there were over 200 people that were there trying to give their opinions as to why they didn't like the Electoral College. And virtually all of them had only one argument. Their argument was, well, there must be something wrong with the Electoral College. It didn't elect my favorite candidate. And that was the extent of their argument.
Sure.
I was given only 1 minute so I was not able to reverse the Senate vote. So I'm afraid that Colorado has now become part of that scheme, the cabal.
Fortunately for our shared state of Colorado, Professor, we do have the opportunity in November to vote down the National Popular Vote Compact. We'll see what happens there. But Professor Robert Hardaway of the College of Law at the University of Denver, who again filed an amicus brief in the Colorado case, Colorado Department of State v. Baca. So great to have your insights today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Thank you. Thank you.
And have a great day.
Thank you.
Be well. Once again, Professor Robert Hardaway of the University of Denver joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And it is always great to talk with a professor like Mr. Hardaway to get his take on what's happening in these intriguing, fascinating court cases across the country. All right, well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, but never fear, we'll be back tomorrow with Jim Antle, politics editor at the Washington Examiner, for Washington Examiner Wednesday, to get his thoughts on the issues of the day. It should be an engaging and interesting conversation. We will talk with Jim Antle then. Thanks to you for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, being a part of the program. Please do subscribe to the show on YouTube, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also, follow me on Twitter at Sang Center, Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. Like and follow and subscribe to our friends at the Washington Examiner. My thanks to them, and again, thanks to you for joining us on the program. Be well, stay healthy. Thanks for taking the time. We'll see you tomorrow, and as always, may God bless America.